Our key verse here is verse number 8, if you would just glance at it real quick. But Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's food or with the wine that he drank. This is the word of God. I want to use for a subject this morning, if you would allow me, change caused by faithful men. That's what I want to talk about. Change caused by faithful men. Faithfulness is an interesting concept because it not only deals with our internal desires, but it deals with the desire of both parties involved. Faithfulness is one of those things where oftentimes to be faithful to a thing, you have got to consider the thing more than you consider yourself. To be faithful in a relationship is to not be so concerned or wrapped up with what you gain from the relationship, but what you can bring to the relationship. And this is why faithfulness can be such a difficult thing to do. Because many times faithfulness does not feel good. Faithfulness is one of those things that require patience, requires determination, requires endurance. In fact, faithfulness can be defined as a constant loyalty. Implies the quality or the quantity of stability, dependability, and devotion. Faithfulness implies long, continued, and steadfast fidelity to whatever one is bound to by a pledge. Notice the language. Whatever one is bound to by a pledge, duty, or obligation. It was stated once by Edwin Lewis Cole that your faithfulness makes you trustworthy to God. And if your faithfulness is what makes you trustworthy to God, if you can figure out what someone is faithful to, then you can figure out what they can be trusted with. Let me give it to you again. If you can figure out what someone is faithful to, you can then figure out what they can be trusted with. If one is faithful to be a diligent steward over their finance, you know they can be trusted with money. If one has proven to be faithful in their spousal relationship, God can bless them with a husband or a wife. If one has been proven to be diligent in their stewardship over their children, then God can bless them with children who are obedient. Or even if their child goes astray, God can bless them because he knows that they are able to have patience and endurance regardless of the storm that the situation may bring. And many times we as believers, as children of God, we find ourselves being faithful to God with the contingency that God has the ability to bless us. But faithfulness, true faithfulness, real faithfulness is not measured by your ability to be steadfast because God can. But it's your ability to be steadfast because God won't. In other words, God, when he views us in our faithfulness, it is not always measured by what we desire to retain from God, but rather how we respond to when God says no, or when he withholds his hand. And there are a few people under the sound of my voice this morning that at some point in your life you have gone through situations, storms, trials, tribulations, and tests where God said no. Where you asked for a blessing and God said no. Where you asked for a miracle and God said no. Where you asked for a breakthrough and God said no. Where you asked for an open door and God said no. And your faithfulness is not measured over the fact of whether when he says yes, you're able to show up on Sunday morning, but your faithfulness is measured over the fact when he says no, you can still pay your tithes and offering. And when he says no, you still show up Sunday morning. When he says no, you still come into the house of God with your hands uplifted, with your arms outstretched, and with your heart willing and yielded to the Spirit of God, because faithful people are faithful not only in the good times, but they're faithful in the bad times. In fact, our text today narrates this faithfulness concept for us. And interestingly enough, it does it from the perspective of a no. If you examine the context of the text, you begin to understand that the people of God are in bondage. The people of God are in bondage, interestingly enough, by those who don't believe in the same God they do. Put it to you this way: Israel, specifically here, Daniel, Mishael, Azariah, Hananiah, they come out of the tribe of Judah. They're in Babylonian captivity. And it seems like a helpless situation because Israel is not a major world power at the time. In fact, Israel has never been a major world power. In this time specifically, there are two main world powers that we are given information to that are directly related to the people of God. There is Egypt and there is Assyria. A province of Assyria is Babylon. Babylon is where we find these characters in slavery. The time is 605 BC. They are in this place, tossed, turned, battled between these major powers of the day who do not honor Yahweh, one God, as the true living God. Egyptians are polytheistic. The Assyrians are polytheistic. The Babylonians are polytheistic. But in the midst of this, Judah, who serves the one and true living God, monotheistic, and those who are with them are not only protected, watch this, y'all, but they are preserved. Let me help you. Here it is. The people of God are enslaved to those who do not honor God as God, but they are protected and preserved. I'll prove it to you. The Bible says here that the king asks or requests for some of the people of Israel, this is verse 3, both of the royal family and of the nobility, youths without blemish and good appearance. This is the best of the people of God, the educated, all full in all wisdom, endowed with knowledge, understanding, and learning, and competent to stand in the king's palace to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. What the king is doing, he's taking the best of a nation and trying to cultivate them in order to meet his need. The captivity account here chronicles the lives of people who are not like everyone else. The only reason we know about Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah is because they are not like everyone else. Let me tell you why they're not like everyone else. They are gifted. They are promised. They are special. They are set apart. But watch this, y'all. They are gifted, promised, special, set apart, but they're still in bondage. Let me run it back and give it to you again. They're special. They got gifts. They got talents. They're set apart. But guess what, y'all? They're in bondage just like everybody else from their nation. And sometimes we get discouraged because we say, God, you gave me this gift. You gave me this talent. You gave me this ability. Why am I in bondage like everyone else? And God, through this text, is trying to teach us that those who are gifted and those who are not gifted are privy to the same trials, tribulations, storms, tests, circumstances, problems, issues, because it's not about how good you are, but it's about how faithful God is and about how faithful you can be to God. Because watch what happens, y'all. They're in bondage just like everybody else, but their position is different. Because your gift may not deliver you from the same bondage as your neighbor, but it may put you in a different position than your neighbor. Let me help you. Here it is. Here it is. Joseph is thrown in the same prison as criminals. But for some reason, he still has Pharaoh's ear because of his position. Because he's thrown in the jail with criminals, but he's thrown in a cell with people that were at the king's table. And sometimes God will put you in bondage, but in a different position. Because he doesn't want you to focus on the shackles, but he wants you to focus on the purpose of the position. And sometimes we get discouraged in the bondage and we miss out on the purpose of the position. And the purpose of the position is so that you can be faithful. Notice what the king's request is. The king's request is that you feed them food from my table. You give them the wine from my table. And in 3 years' time, after you've taught them all this stuff I want you to teach them, I want you to bring them back to me. And we're going to test them, and we're going to see how valuable they are to me in this kingdom. That's basically what he's saying. And what happens is Daniel, in verse number 8, begins to show us how we should respond in bondage in a position. He says in verse 8, I cannot defile myself with the king's food. Now hold up, because I have a problem with the text, because he's not in the ghetto somewhere. He's not in the projects. He's in the king's palace. So if you eating from the king's table, if you drinking the king's wine, can't be that bad. And he says, I can't defile myself, let me break it down this way, with what tastes good. I can't mess up what he put in me with what feels good. Help me. I need y'all to help me this morning. I can't dilute his plan for my life with what may look good on the outside. And he says this, because the eunuchs who have charge over them, they begin to get nervous now. He said, hold up, man. Hold on. You don't want to defile yourself, but look, if you don't eat this, I could be killed. Daniel says, here's what you do. This is what faithfulness will do. Faithfulness will build a confidence in you. He says, this is what I want you to do. me and my boys, we're going to eat what we used to eating. It's part of our promise and our covenant to God. Those over there, y'all let them eat whatever you want them to eat. Give us 10 days and bring us back. And you tell us who look better. So the eunuch says, okay, y'all eat vegetables and water, and we'll give them meat from the king's table and wine. 10 days. Bible says they came back after the 10 days. Daniel and his boys looked full. In other words, they looked better by remaining faithful to God, even though what they were faithful to didn't taste as good. Because sometimes for you to be better, you've got to partake in bitterness. I wish y'all helped me this morning. Sometimes for you to get to promise, you've got to go through process, and process doesn't always feel good. Process doesn't always have people patting you on the back. And what happens is oftentimes when we see people who are gifted, who are operating in their gift, operating in their purpose, operating in their promise, we look at them for where they are right now, and how they are operating in the gift, and how they are operating in the talent. We see them behind the mic singing, and we see them behind the mic preaching, and we see them on the drums playing, and we see them on the keyboard playing, but we don't know how many tears they had to cry to get to where they are right now. I want to help you at this point in the message. Lean on your neighbor real quick and say, neighbor, if you only knew what I had to go through to get here and look as good as I did right now. Every now and then, you ought to walk down the street with your head held high and with your chest stuck out, because you know that where you are right now, you didn't get there by no handout. Ain't nobody handed it to you, but you were faithful to God. And let me tell you this, if you stay faithful to God, God will stay faithful to you. I'm near my exit here when I tell you this. What happens is they get to a place where the king, he tries to put his influence on them. That's mainly what's happening. He's bringing individuals from another country, the best, and he's trying to put his stamp of approval on them to meet his agenda. But God's purpose for them is not necessarily in agreement with the king's agenda. And because his purpose for them is not in agreement with the king's agenda, he can't act like the king's people. Because his path is different. Because his purpose is different. And you ought to stop judging people by what you see on the outside. Their path may just be different. You see? We live in a society where we look at people by the car you drive, the house you live in, who you're married to, or how your kids is acting, what kind of clothes you wear, but we don't know the process. We don't know the process. And hold up, let me tell you this. Some people look like stuff that they're not really. Some people deceive you by appearance to make you believe that they're at a place that they're really not. You ever seen a person with a new BMW, a new Mercedes Benz, and pull up to their house at the projects? Because they're trying to make you believe something by their appearance, but haven't gone through the process. This is the 11:30 sermon. But let me tell you something. Daniel, he stays faithful to God, even with something that doesn't taste as good, but the result is a lot better. And sometimes the weight of what doesn't feel good and taste good is what you need to make you better. Because if you keep partaking of what tastes good and what feels good, you'll get numb to having your flesh appeased. And the problem with that, I gotta go. The problem with that is this. When you get used to you being happy about what you want, you have no regard for what God wants for you. That's why we got people in the church that's battling with their faith, because they're too busy looking at what other people got out there, not realizing that what they got out there is because all they care about is their flesh. Let me help you. This is why we got millionaires killing themselves, because they've been chasing after stuff that appease their flesh.
That's right.
Paul says, I know how to be a base.
That's right.
I know how to abound.
That's right.
Everywhere and in all things, I've learned how to want. I learned how to suffer. But I've learned that in everything to be content. Why? Because I don't need money. It may help me buy some stuff that I want, but I don't need it.
That's right.
I don't need clothes. It may help me look good some days, but I don't need it.
That's right.
Grandma said it this way: as long as I got King Jesus, I don't need nobody else. I don't need nobody else. I don't need nothing else. I don't need no status. I don't need no position. I don't need no title. As long as I got Jesus on my side. That's all I really need. And I want to tell you, sometimes people try to manipulate your gift. They try to manipulate your talent. They try to manipulate your purpose by saying, come on over here and partake of what we got going on over here. And I know it looks good what they got over there. I know it might feel good what they got going on over there. I know you might act different and you might walk different when you get what they got over there. But if you just remember in your mind the purpose and the plan, if you remember in your mind the process that God has discovered and has created for you, you'll begin to remind yourself that I'm worth much more than anything that anybody could ever offer me. And I'm on my way to my seat now, but I wonder, is there anybody in here under the sound of my voice that's ever been at some places in your life where people tried to make you into some stuff, and they tried to push you into some stuff, and they tried to mold you and make you something that God did not call you to be? Can I encourage you today that you ought to be faithful to what God called you to? I know it gets rough, I know it gets tough, but you got to stay faithful to what God calls you to. Don't be faithful to a dollar. Don't be faithful to a relationship. Don't be faithful to a title. Don't be faithful to a status. Don't be faithful to a promotion. Don't be faithful to anything that stops you from being faithful to God's call on your life. When you are steadfast, when you are unmovable, when you are always abounding in the work of the Lord, God is able to keep you in the middle of your struggle, in the middle of your test, and in the middle of the storm. And I wonder, is there any men under the sound of my voice that you are worried about how you're going to pay your bills? You're worried about how you're going to get your wife to love you again, and how you're going to get your kids to act right, and how you gonna get this promotion on your job. I got one word for you: faithfulness. Faithfulness is able to unlock doors that man closed in your face. Faithfulness is able to put you at the highest mountain when people try to knock you to the lowest valley. And what we can learn from Daniel is that faithfulness might be bitter, but faithfulness will make you better. Faithfulness, it may be bitter, but faithfulness will always make you better. Change caused by faithful men. Because the text goes on to say that after they stood in front of the eunuchs and saw that Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys who looked a lot healthier, they changed the diet of all of those who were under their watch. Because faithfulness may be bitter, but it'll always make you better. Let's put our hands together and give God a hand of praise.